In America, every grocery line tells a story. Mother counting items before the cashier scans them. A father quietly returning a pack of cereal after realizing the card might not have enough left. A young student buying milk, ramen, and hope. Behind these quiet, everyday moments lies one of the most vital programs in American life. SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. For decades, it has been the thin line separating survival and starvation for millions. But today, that line is being stretched to its breaking point. When MSNBC's Nicolle Wallace looked into the camera and called it a self-inflicted, manufactured crisis, she wasn't exaggerating, because what's unfolding right now in the United States is not an accident. It's a choice, a political decision, with real human cost. The crisis began when changes to SNAP funding collided with expiring pandemic-era benefits. For millions of families, that meant the end of emergency support that kept food on their tables through the worst economic shocks in decades. The result? Empty fridges, shorter meals, and a growing sense that the people in power have turned away from those who need them most. Nicolle Wallace's reaction went viral, not because she said something shocking, but because she said something painfully true. This isn't an unavoidable tragedy, she said. This is self-inflicted, a crisis created by people who knew exactly what they were doing. To understand what she meant, we need to go back. SNAP began as part of the New Deal's legacy, a safety net woven through decades of reform, compromise, and quiet political battles. By the 21st century, it had become one of the most efficient anti-poverty tools in the country. In 2020, during the pandemic, the system was tested like never before. Millions of Americans, from restaurant workers to delivery drivers, from single parents to elderly retirees, suddenly needed help. And for a while, help came. The government expanded SNAP benefits, raising allotments and easing restrictions. It was one of the rare moments when America acted decisively to prevent hunger. Those measures worked. Childhood hunger dropped. Families reported stability. Communities that once faced desperation found breathing room. But like so many good things, it wasn't built to last. When the emergency allotments ended, the average household lost about $90 a month in benefits. For a family already surviving on the edge, $90 can mean the difference between dinner and nothing. And when those cuts came, food banks across the nation reported record. Demand lines stretched around buildings, shelves, emptied faster than donations could arrive. Volunteers worked overtime. This wasn't a natural disaster. It was a deliberate rollback, justified by arguments about budget discipline, dependency, and fiscal responsibility. But as Wallace and others pointed out, the math doesn't add up, because the cost of cutting food aid is far greater than the savings it claims to bring. Hunger has a price, in health, in education, in crime, in lost potential. Every child who goes to school hungry struggles to learn. Every senior who skips meals to afford medicine pays with their health. Every working parent who can't focus because of hunger loses. Productivity, that's the invisible tax America imposes on its most vulnerable citizens. Nicolle Wallace, a former Republican strategist turned political analyst, understands this contradiction deeply. She's seen the inner workings of Washington, where empathy too often gets traded for ideology, and that's what made her words sting. She wasn't just criticizing policy, she was exposing hypocrisy. In her broadcast, she asked a question that echoed far beyond the MSNBC studio. How can a country that feeds the world allow its own people to starve? It's a question with no good answer. The truth is, hunger in America is not about scarcity. It's about access. It's about systems that choose profit over people, politics over compassion. And as the SNAP crisis deepens, that truth becomes harder to ignore. Across the country, stories began surfacing, small, personal, heartbreaking. A single mother in Ohio who now eats once a day so her kids can have more. An elderly veteran in Florida skipping meals between disability checks. A grocery clerk in Texas who, despite working full-time, still relies on SNAP to get by. They are not statistics. They are America's working class, the backbone of its economy. the invisible hands that keep its lights on, and yet, they are the first to feel the pain when policy fails. Wallace's commentary struck a nerve because it put faces to the numbers. It stripped away the abstractions and forced viewers to confront reality. This isn't about program efficiency or government spending. It's about whether we, as a nation, believe that feeding people is a moral duty or a political bargaining chip. The irony, of course, is that SNAP is one of the most efficient programs in the federal system. Every dollar spent generates nearly twice that in economic activity. It supports local grocery stores, farmers, and supply chains. It keeps rural economies alive, yet time and again, it's treated like a luxury rather than a necessity. When lawmakers argue about reducing the deficit, SNAP becomes an easy target because the people it helps rarely have the political power to fight back. They don't have lobbyists or super PACs. They have stories, and stories don't always win votes, but they matter because every story is a reminder of what's at stake. Imagine America without SNAP. Millions of children going to bed hungry, hospitals flooded with malnutrition-related illnesses, schools unable to teach effectively because their students are too hungry to focus. That's not an exaggeration. It's a possible future, and it's one that Nicolle Wallace and others are trying to prevent. Her warning was not just about food stamps. It was about values, about what kind of nation America wants to be. She called it self-inflicted because the suffering was predictable. Economists, advocacy groups, even USDA officials had warned what would happen if the emergency allotments were cut too soon. The evidence was there, but politics moved faster than compassion. And so, here we are, a crisis not born from famine or war, but from choices made in climate-controlled rooms, far from the grocery aisles where the consequences are felt. There's a haunting quiet to hunger. It doesn't scream. It whispers. In the rumble of an empty stomach, in the hesitation of a mother pretending she's already eaten, in the silence of a child who doesn't ask for seconds because they know there isn't any more. That's the sound Nicolle Wallace was trying to make America hear. And maybe, just maybe, that's where change begins. When television screens become mirrors, when viewers realize that the crisis isn't out there, it's right here, in their communities, their schools, their towns. The future of SNAP, and of America's moral conscience, depends on what happens next. Will lawmakers restore the cuts? Will states step in to fill the gap? Or will this become another chapter in the long story of political neglect? History suggests the answer will depend on pressure, from voters, from media, from compassion itself, because hunger is not partisan, it's human. As Wallace concluded, we don't need to imagine what happens when you take food away from struggling families. We already know. We've seen it, we've measured it, and we've ignored it. Her words linger, not as outrage, but as a challenge to policymakers, to viewers, to all of us. The story of SNAP is, at its core, the story of America's conscience. It asks a simple question. In the richest country on earth, who gets to eat? The answer should be everyone. But for millions, it isn't. Not yet. And until that changes, commentators like Nicolle Wallace will keep speaking up, not to score political points, but to remind us that compassion is a form of strength, that empathy is not weakness, that policy is not just paperwork, it's life or death for someone, somewhere, tonight. So when she called it a self-inflicted, manufactured crisis, she wasn't just describing a policy failure, she was describing a nation at war with its own promise, a country capable of greatness, but too often paralyzed by division. A people who can end hunger, but haven't decided to yet. The power to change this story still exists, in Congress, in communities, in us, because hunger is not inevitable. It's a decision, and decisions can be changed. Maybe that's where we end this story, not with outrage, but with awareness. Because every crisis that's manufactured can also be undone. And every policy written in ink can be rewritten in compassion. Tonight, somewhere across America, a family will go to bed a little hungrier than they were yesterday, not because they failed, but because the system did. And the question remains, who are we if we let that continue? Nicolle Wallace's words were a warning, but also a mirror, a reflection of what we could be If we choose empathy over apathy, action over argument, the power to end hunger doesn't belong to the headlines. It belongs to the people watching right now. Because this story, like every American story, is still being written. And what happens next depends on us.